Welcome to Franchise Focus. I'm your host, Lisa Linkowski. I'm a certified franchise consultant representing hundreds of franchise concepts. And Franchise Focus is all about talking to people that are in this industry. And today in studio, I have with me Marty Tarabar, who is the franchise partner with Gecko Hospitality. And welcome, Marty.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you, and we have a little friend with us as well, and it's not that Gecko. This is a different Gecko.
Different Gecko.
So before we jump into what Gecko Hospitality, which is a franchise, what it's all about, Marty, tell us about yourself. Tell us about what you were doing before you got sucked into the franchise space there.
So in college, I took a part-time job at a seafood restaurant, learning how to cook, and kind of worked my way into the restaurant business. Before I graduated college, I was really ready to be a full-time manager. So I started managing restaurants, went on to national restaurants, regional groups, district manager level. And after a bunch of years, I decided that I had had enough of restaurants, and the opportunity came up to talk about franchising a recruiting firm. And that's kind of how I got into it. I was looking for a new job. A recruiter contacted me and talked me into Gecko Hospitality.
And so a recruiter found you for this?
Yeah, like most restaurant managers, when they're looking for a new job, they look for someone who can help them. And this recruiter from Gecko Hospitality reached out. We started a conversation. He actually sent me on a couple of restaurant interviews. But as much as they might have been good interviews, he just kept talking about the opportunity to do something different.
Interesting. And what was it about this? Because you were in corporate America, what was it that attracted you to this franchise and the concept of franchising? So
the concept of franchising was pretty strange to me, quite honestly, but the idea of being able to help people and match my experience of restaurants and bring people in the restaurant industry into better jobs, different jobs, that was very enticing, because I've been working with restaurant managers and cooks for 30 years before I made this change. And that I think is the biggest part, is just helping people find their place, find their way, and kind of help them on the career.
And how long of a period of time did it take for you to evaluate the concept and then decide this is where I want to go, this is my next path?
It really was a short time. I had a couple of conversations with my recruiter from Gecko, and I flew out to Chicago, where our corporate headquarters were at that time. I interviewed with the president of the company, and we kind of hit it off. It sounded like it was a good opportunity for me, and probably within 2 or 3 weeks, I had made the decision that this was going to be the right thing for me.
Interesting. Okay. So we're talking about Gecko. We're hearing these words of hospitality and restaurant management. Let's dig right in. What is Gecko Hospitality?
Got it. So Gecko Hospitality is a national company. We're based right now in Fort Myers, Florida. And what we do is we help candidates, people who are looking for jobs in the restaurant industry. Restaurant hospitality includes hotels, casinos, country clubs, full service restaurants, quick service restaurants. We help those individuals find a job, and then we help those companies who own those businesses find the people that they need. And right now, post-COVID, a lot of the restaurants are really looking for strong, talented managers, and Gecko is able to provide them the people that they need to help build their businesses and grow their businesses. So
it's pretty interesting. You've stayed exactly in your path of where you're going. When I talk with candidates, sometimes I'll have them say, let's say they did accounting for 25 years, and I may show them an accounting concept, and they're like, no, if anything, I have realized I don't want anything to do with that anymore. Show me something else. But you are going, no, this is the area that I love. This is in my blood. This is what I do. And now you're just doing it full speed ahead. And by the way, at a time that is so critical because of what's going on in the labor pool. So at what point, when did you become an owner of Gecko Hospitality franchise?
So it's been 17 years.
17 years.
And it was the only idea. I actually had a little discussion with some people about opening my own restaurant. And once I realized the financial part of it, I realized that was just not going to work. Right. So 17 years ago I started, and it was the right decision for me. It was a little bit different for my family. It was a different lifestyle, but it was what I know. I've known restaurants, worked in restaurants for so many years that I know the language, I can speak the language, and I know what my candidates are going through. I've been there.
Right. So 17 years, can
Yep.
you dig back in your memory bank and think about how long did it take for you to ramp up where you were making money that you were able to pay yourself and, and prove to your family that this was going to happen and you were going to be success at it?
Right. I could tell you that in the first, I didn't make my first placement, my management placement, until 28 days in. So by day 21, I was thinking about, do we need to sell the house and move to a condo? What do
21 days in.
I was scared to death. But on day 28, I made my first placement. On day 29, I made my second placement. And then in between those 2 days, I realized, wow, I can actually make this work and it could be worthwhile. So after the first month, I understood what I needed to do, how I needed to do it. And within the first year, I was well on my way.
Wow. And no regrets, and you didn't have to sell the house, everything was good.
No, not at all. We still had a child in college at the time. We paid all the college bills, everything was great.
All right, good. And how did you find your first placement? Do you remember?
Yeah, so at that time, Monster and Career Builder were like the biggest places to find candidates. Monster, that's so long ago.
Yeah.
And we had posted ads, and someone applied to one of my ads, and I interviewed him, and I don't remember if he was Monster or Career Builder, but I sent him to, at that point, the company was Old Country Buffet, and that was my first placement with Old Country Buffet.
Okay, all right. And do you keep tabs on any of your placements, or no? Once they're gone, they're gone, or do you keep tabs?
I've become friendly with some of my placements.
Okay.
I have some placements that have become friends for 16 years now.
Wow.
And that's been really nice to be able to help them, not only along their career, but to get to know them along their life.
Right, and also then you help them if they're looking to leave where you place them, and it's been a couple years because it changes. The turnover is very substantial. They come back to you and go, Marty, what do you got for me? I'm ready for a change, right?
It's like being a sports agent.
Okay.
So, a professional football player gets a sports agent, and that sports agent kind of guides them through their path. We kind of look at ourselves like agents, and we're helping them along the way. I've recently, one of the guys who I placed about 16 years ago in his first position, I ended up placing his wife in a different position 2 years later, and he just became a Gecko Hospitality partner. So I helped train him just 2 months ago.
Excellent. Talk about your territory, because 17 years ago the whole remote thing was not happening. So what kind of territory do you cover? It's quite vast.
So I actually work in 8 different states. My first territories, when I started with Gecko Hospitality, all of the franchises east of the Mississippi were taken. So my first franchise was Iowa, Nebraska, and Arkansas. And I knew where they all were on a map, but that was my extent of the knowledge. So I really had to learn the market, and I've been remote the whole time with those markets, and have been very successful in those markets. Over the years, I've grown and picked up other states. I now my office works in Iowa, Nebraska, Arkansas, Idaho, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and now parts of New Jersey. So I've built a staff to be able to handle all of those territories.
Do you have any idea how many placements you've made over the 17 years? If you had to hazard a guess?
It's close to 2,000.
Wow, that's significant,
Yeah,
right?
it's close to
That's
2,000.
nothing to sneeze at.
Nope.
And now you have a staff under you.
Yeah.
At what point in the franchise did you hire your first employee?
After the first year,
Okay.
I realized that I was, with just the 3 states, I realized that I wasn't able to handle all the business that was there, and I needed someone to do some of the recruiting with me.
So they were hired to do not admin work, but to do actual recruiting with you?
Actually recruiting, yes.
And at what point now, where are you at? What's your staff look like?
I have a staff of 6 full-time recruiters.
And they're across the country, right?
Yes, they're across the country. 2 or 3 work remote. My son actually has been with my business for 15 and a half, 16 years now. So that's been good. But the others, I have 4 people that work in my office. Some days remote, some days in the office.
Okay, all right. So your son, I didn't even realize that
Yeah.
when we talked about it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other nice things about the franchising is that legacy piece of, that you take something and you build it, and then you have your children, if they're interested, coming in and being a part of that. So that's exciting,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's provided this whole other world for your son that you couldn't have even imagined before you came along.
No, and it was not an industry that he was familiar with. So
Right.
he had taken some part-time jobs in restaurants, But we really had to start with, this is how we recruit, and this is the business, and it was an interesting education.
All right, excellent. So how many owners are there nationwide? You talked about that it was sold out, across the, in
Yep.
certain areas, and so how many owners are there today?
So there are 38 franchise partners. The company is actually divided up into two divisions. There's the restaurant division and the hospitality division. The hospitality covers hotels, casinos, country clubs, and the restaurant division covers pretty much everything else in the restaurant side. So all of the restaurant territories are currently sold out. We still have some hotel hospitality franchises available, and we are opening next year in England.
Oh, so going international.
Yeah, we already operate in Canada,
Okay.
and then next year we'll be opening in England.
Talk to me about the owners. So 17 years, you had to have developed some pretty good friendships within the system with the other owners, I would assume.
Absolutely. First, the president of the company, we have become very good friends over the 17 years, which is great. And the owners, all of the other franchise partners, it's a really good camaraderie. We help each other at times. If we have hard jobs to fill, we suggest our candidates or transfer our candidates over. And also, if we have new companies that we're going to go after that affect other partners that are in many states, we're being able to provide opportunities for our other partners to work those territories.
Wow. Yeah, that is one of the beauties of franchising. So if you had tried to create Marty's hospitality concept, right? You would have been by yourself trying to figure this all out, not having the system, the technology, everything that's behind it. And to your point that if you have an issue, you can sit there and call up one of the other owners. They say, ooh, I can help you. Let me take this from you. And conversely, they can throw business your way because for whatever reason, it's in your area and it doesn't cover in their area or whatever. You're not in competition with each other.
Not at all.
Not at all. It's completely separate, independent, business. And so, but you get to lean on each other so that you're not by yourself.
And we do that often, especially with big hotel groups or big restaurant groups that are looking for C-level, chief executive officers, chief operating officers. We don't always have them in Iowa, Nebraska. So maybe I can find other partners who have a C-level candidate who's looking for something who wouldn't mind moving to my territory.
Right.
So we share those candidates, and it's very helpful for us. And I know that over the years I've leaned on many of the other partners to for some guidance, for some direction. And now being a pretty senior partner, I'm getting a lot of calls
They're
too.
leaning on you, and now you become a mentor, and you're a mentor in the business. So now you're helping others. And I always say to people, like, if you're not, when I had my franchise, I'm like, if you are not utilizing the system in that way, what a mistake. If you think that you're the smartest person in the room, what a mistake. Like here you even said, like you've got decades of experience in this area, and yet you were looking to other partners and getting their best practices because why? Everyone does things differently. Everyone comes to the table with their own spin and their own way of looking at things, and you get to learn from that and just make your business that much better, right?
Yeah, I've actually learned so much from my staff that I've brought in to work in my office. That's why I really don't like the remote part, because I like the interaction that I'm getting from my much younger staff. I've incorporated some of their interview techniques, some of their wording into my own wording, and it's amazing. I love that interaction, and I'm certainly open to hear from not only the other partners and take from the other partners, but from my own staff.
Sure, because everything is different, and they come to the table looking at things just totally different, and they also understand who you're trying to attract, right? And how to go fish for them, because it's a totally different world dealing with our generation, my generation, the next generation, and then the next generation, and they're going, no, you need to go over here, and you need to think about this, in this way, and you probably would not have possibly even considered it.
No, as a company, we're on Instagram now, and 3 years ago, we were just poo-pooing who would do anything on Instagram. So it's amazing what has changed over the years.
Will we see Marty doing TikTok videos?
No. No.
I was waiting for you to say yes, and I bring my friend with me, and we do some TikTok videos.
No. We do have one of our partners who is doing the TikTok videos for Gecko Hospitality, and she is mid-20s, I believe.
Okay.
She's one of our youngest partners, and she said, "Oh, I'd love to do that." So she does her TikTok videos for us.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, everything changes. If you try to stay the same and you try to stay stagnant, you're done.
Yep.
You're irrelevant. So you've got to keep moving, and you've got to, what was Monster, which was huge 20 years ago, is now Monster what? Like, you
Yeah.
don't even,
People don't know what it is.
yeah, they don't even know what it is. Like when you talked about it, I was like, oh my gosh, Monster was everything, right? It was the monster in the industry.
That Monster was on the Super Bowl. They did Super Bowl ads. The
Right.
Monster Super Bowl ad was
Of
like the
course.
thing to look for.
Yeah, everything evolves and everything changes. So, all right. Well, Marty, this first half has been incredible, and we've got so much more to get to. So, I'm going to ask the audience to stay tuned and hear a word from our sponsor, Zoom One Media.
Aloha! Joe Silva here with Kukua Technologies. I'm excited to see you on Tuesdays on Morning Coffee for our tech tips.
Let's face it, lawyers get a bad rap. I'm Erin Brucey, host of Legal Breakdown, where we dissect legal topics for the everyday viewer, with a mix of interesting guests to talk about current events and hot legal topics. Let's work together to make the law accessible and relevant to everyone. Catch us every week on RVN Television.
Welcome back to Franchise Focus. I'm your host, Lisa Lankowski, and sitting with me is Marty Tarabar, who is the franchise partner for Gecko Hospitality. And Marty, we were having such an incredible conversation about franchise and the system and how you're utilizing it and how it's been such a benefit to you. But it's not all roses. It's not all, butterflies and unicorns in the franchise world. And this is why I always love to talk to the owners themselves, because I want to hear about the times when it wasn't so rosy, about those times where you're like, I may have made the biggest mistake of my life, or, things were just not going along. 17 years is a long time. You went through the 2008 recession. You've been through a lot.
Yep.
And of course the pandemic. But I'm curious to hear what's been your biggest obstacle and how did you overcome it?
I think the biggest obstacle was starting, because I had never owned my own business before, and understanding what it is to start owning my own business and doing things for myself. I sought out legal counsel and financial counsel first thing, and I wanted to understand what it meant to own my business. And had great counsel, and they've been very good for me over the years and kept up with me. I think the biggest challenge for me was when I bought the territory. It was a virgin territory. Gecko Hospitality had not been involved there before, so I really had to build my own business. I had to do the business development, call on clients that have never been called on before. We had national contracts at that time, but my states, Iowa and Nebraska, were mostly franchised organizations. So I had to talk to franchisees and convince them that I could help them struggle through help them with the struggles that they were trying to do to staff their own businesses.
Right.
So I think that was the hardest part, was becoming a business developer of my own business. That was the hardest part for me.
Yeah, and people always ask me, they're like, who makes the best candidate for this? And and I do talk about people with those business development skills, because it is critical. Unless you have a business where you put it up and immediately people come pouring in, most businesses are not like
No,
that.
not that many of
and
those.
you've got to really get out there, and it can be grueling, and it takes a lot of rejection, and then you got to get back up and you got to do it all over again. But you have the passion, because this is what you've always known and it's what you've always done. So that's what's kept you in there. My franchise was a marketing concept, and my background is marketing.
Right.
So yeah, I had a huge passion for it. So on my worst days, didn't matter because I was doing what I loved.
Right.
And then you dust off and go, okay, I'm cutting it early today.
Right.
It's not a good day. We're going to start again tomorrow, right? But you can't cut off too many times because then you're going to be in trouble. And also to your point about hiring legal counsel and hiring accounting, this is so important that, people go, well, they're not going to make any changes to the franchise disclosure document. And I go, that may be, but you need to know what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
You need to understand this thing because you're legally bound to it. And you want an attorney to explain this through and through and go make sure that you understand it clearly and what your obligations are, right? Yeah. Very important.
Yep, the first FDD that I saw, I had so many questions on it, I just kind of wore out my highlighter and went to my legal counsel and said, what does this mean? And we talked it through, and there were some changes that we made to the FDD, or I proposed to the FDD for my own franchise agreement that ended up becoming part of the national agreements,
Right.
just to make some sense out of things.
Yeah, well, and sometimes they get a different perspective again, and then they go, okay, and then other times they're like, nope, this is the document,
Yep.
we don't make any changes, and you've got to deal with it.
Exactly.
And then you have to decide how much of a pain point that is for you and whether or not it's worth it to you or not. Same thing with royalty fees. Don't complain now that you've got a thriving business about paying a royalty fee,
Right.
because again, if you had Marty hospitality business, you wouldn't probably have the business that you have today.
No.
And so, yeah, you pay that royalty fee. It's just part of doing business, right?
Yep.
All right, so obstacles are really important because you're going to come into them as a business owner. I'm sorry, that's just the way it's going to be. And you need to hear that. And you need to hear that it's going to be hard and it's going to be grueling. And, and then you take off and then you're like, whoo, I've got this great business. So, biggest mistakes that you see franchise owners make, because I'm sure you've seen franchise partners come and go. And what do you attribute that to?
So I guess on the restaurant side, part of my job is talking to new restaurant franchisees who are opening their first restaurant or their second restaurant, or their family is involved in their first or second restaurant. A lot of these franchisees think that they just bought an ATM that has money spitting out the front of the ATM, and that's really not how it works. There's a major investment that they have to make. You're not going to be able to pull profit out in your first weeks, months, year. It takes time, and a lot of new franchisees don't understand that. And we've had franchisees in Gecko Hospitality as well who thought that they should be able to make money right away and got very disappointed and left the company, some within a year, because they didn't get what they thought they were going to get. And I think that the same thing happens when people buy a restaurant franchise. They think that, oh, restaurants make plenty of money, look at Raising Cane's, look at this company, look at that company, I could do it too.
Right, and the expectations are just not suitable. They're not correct. No. And they come in, and by the way, yes, my candidates come to me all the time, talk to me about food. I go, let's talk about something else.
Right.
I worked in the restaurant space. You and I talked about that for almost a decade, and it is one of the most difficult industries out there. And if you don't know what it is that you're doing and you don't have yourself aligned properly, like, it's going to be really tough, right?
Yep.
So yeah, and and sitting there and just chucking money into this thing over, just beyond, and you're just watching the money sink out because the profit margins are not substantial.
No.
They're just not. And typically, when you have a really good business, you're owning several. You're not owning one QSR. You're owning 15 of those suckers, because that now is how you're going to be making your money, right?
Yep. And I think right now there's a lot of pro sports people that are getting into this franchise business, and they see how successful Shaq is, and they see how successful some of those other guys are with all their business. And I'm working with a professional athlete now with a franchise in the middle of the United States, and they've made some decisions. The guy has absolutely no restaurant background or restaurant experience, and has made decisions that are going to affect his business for what he thought were financial decisions, I imagine.
Right.
And it's going to have a major effect on his business.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of time, especially the sport people, they don't come with any kind of background in business many times. And so that is, and unless they've got a really good team around them, which some do, some don't. right? Where they're looking out for themselves, not for their client. That can be a whole nother level of problems,
Absolutely.
right? And you've seen some of these big things have just petered out and gone to nothing because it wasn't managed properly. It all comes to the management. So yeah, the ATM is very, very an important analogy there. So I asked you early on about, when you first came into this 17 years ago, about making that decision. And, one of the really critical areas that I say to my candidates is the support of your family. Because if you don't have that support, it's going to be detrimental to you from the beginning, because you're going to be doubting yourself from the beginning. You may not admit it to anyone,
Right.
but you're going to be doubting yourself.
Absolutely.
You're going to be waking up in the middle of the night having some sweat, going, what did I do? Talk to me about your wife. How has she been through all of this?
So my wife lived through 30 years of me in the restaurant industry. And so anyone that's done that has an amazing wife. The amount of hours that I put in, the amount of time away from home, the amount of family events that I missed over those 30 years were massive. There was tons of time where I did not get to spend time with my family. So leaving the industry, leaving that part of the industry and going to recruiting, my wife kind of took up the ball and had a full-time job that covered insurance, because my own franchise, I own my own business, I couldn't really get my own insurance, so she stayed full-time, but she was behind me. She knew how unhappy I had been in my later years working in the restaurants and doing the operation thing. So she understood it and appreciated it, and within the first year when we started really making some inroads and making some good money, it was a good decision, and she was backing me 100%.
Good, excellent. What do you attribute your success of 17 years? Like, what do you, it's the passion of being in the food industry, being in this industry, but are there other things that you look at?
Yeah, I was training a new guy last month, a new franchise partner, and he said, what do I need to do? I said, well, what's your plan B? He goes, well, I think about this, I think about that. I said, I didn't have a plan B. I had this was plan A, and whatever plan B wasn't going to work for me. I knew I just jumped off a cliff. I had to learn how to fly and make this work, because I didn't have a plan B. And I think that biting off and buying a franchise and doing something like this, you have to work on, everything has to be positive. You have to know you're going to make this work. And if you think, well, if it doesn't work, I can always go back to restaurants. I didn't want to. That was not where I wanted to be. Right. So I needed to make it work.
Yeah, and you've got to do everything in your power. I saw it in my own franchise where people just give up and fold up because they go, I can't do this. They become paralyzed, and they're just, and it's too much work. They didn't expect it to be the amount of work, which is crazy. It's a business ownership, right? And they just didn't give it the time for it to marinate to become that big success that they wanted it to be, right?
And we've had franchise owners that have been in less than a year, left the company, and went to open a quick service franchise. And more power to them. I mean, they're young enough to make that happen, and they seem to be successful, and they seem to be enjoying it. That's great. It's not me.
Wonderful. Well, Marty, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story about this. I wish you continuous success. We didn't even get to talk about exit strategy, but now that I know that your son is in the business, I get where that's going. Thank you very much.
You're certainly welcome.
Franchise Focus airs every Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And I'm your host, Lisa Linkowski. You can learn more about me at milestonefranchising.com.